Welcome to Sovereign Conversations, where we explore how to live a life that is freer, that is happier, that is more empowered. And today's episode has got to be my favorite so far. You're in for such a treat. I have two incredible guests. First up, we have Michell Clark, author, entrepreneur, creative, macro influencer. He has over 600,000 human beings following him on Instagram, Twitter, etc. He's the co-founder of the Creative Summer Company, an agency that supports Black-owned brands. And he has written a best-selling book called Keep It 100. I recommend following him on Instagram. He provides beautiful inspiration daily. And next up is David B. Godin, an award-winning TV commercial director who is going to share some really interesting insights into how to be more sovereign in this information-filled world. He's also a Jungian coach. His philosophy, the psychic rebellion, challenges us to unplug from the chaos, and boy, doesn't that sound good, and reconnect with our inner selves using depth psychology and existential philosophy to reclaim creativity, clarity, purpose. You will love hearing from these both. Like I said, this has been my favorite conversation so far, and we've had some really good conversations. So here we go. Let's jump in. Welcome, Michell and David. It's so special to have you both here discussing this idea of sovereignty. And Michell, I would love to hear from you. You've talked about ways that you've sort of reprogrammed yourself and abandoned old ways of thinking that were not serving you. And I'd love to hear, your perspective, your story, whatever you want to share.
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me. We've gone from the real life conversations to the podcast conversation. So just happy to be here. And man, we're jumping right into it. I think that right now I'm in a space of really owning the power that I have to shape my beliefs, which shape how I show up in the world, which shape the world that I experience, right? Like it's very easy to forget that. And I think I'd love to hear more from David too about how much media is impacting self-perception. We got plenty of time for that. So over the past 6 months, I've lost or experienced the kind of alteration of some very foundational relationships that I hold near and dear. And there's a lot of hurt that comes with that. A lot of questioning of self. But with the hurt and the questioning of self, I've also been questioning the way that these foundational relationships have shaped me thus far. I'm 35. I've been in close relationship with lots of these people for more than half my life. And so I'm sitting with the understanding that the stories that I tell myself about who I am, the stories that I tell myself about who I am, those are not just my stories. And so I've been sitting with this concept of rewriting the personal beliefs that I choose for myself, with the understanding that these beliefs will actually, to a certain extent, alter my brain chemistry. They'll alter the way that I show up in the world. And so when I think about sovereignty, I think about starting with the stories that I'm telling myself repeatedly. Because if I'm not thinking about it consciously, it's just already what's been programmed into me by my experiences. And so in this year, this quarter especially, I'm really cognizant of that and looking to reclaim the way that I talk to myself as a means of sovereignty.
I love that, Michell. Can you give an example of one of the sort of ways, one of the stories that was not serving you, and then how you're reprogramming that, just to make it real concrete for people?
Absolutely. I had the pleasure of hosting my very first retreat about 3 weeks ago now at the Kripalu Center in Massachusetts, and it's a very prestigious place. It has 50 plus years of history, a lot of very well-known practitioners and, celebrities and such. They teach there pretty often. I'm not a yoga practitioner. I do not fit the aesthetic of a yoga practitioner. I am a writer who was invited into the space, a very white dominant space, to share my perspective and to teach. And so the story that I found myself walking in with was that I don't belong. I don't have a place in this space, and that me being in this space, despite being invited by faculty, would be disruptive and would not be what folks were expecting. I saw that, I recognized it, and I think that a lot of the work that I did between day one of the retreat, which went well despite my fears.
I'm sure it did.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience, but I took some time that night and the next morning, to just really remind myself that I can believe that I belong in the space, or I could believe that I don't, and whichever belief that I hold to ends up being what I feed into. Right? There's no rubric for belonging in a space other than giving yourself permission to exist confidently and authentically in said space. And so I made a very conscious choice to remind myself of that. I journaled about it and decided to walk into that space, well, saying, well, what if I already knew that I belonged in this space? Which led to me being more social, making my teaching more conversational, a little bit less rigid, and gave me permission to read the room, to affirm that folks wanted to learn from my perspective, and moving forward with that in mind, made it for more of an interactive experience, and allowed me to loosen up and be myself and kind of improvise where that was needed, which I believe led to probably some of the most impactful conversations that we had as part of the retreat. And again, it all started with that conscious choice to choose different beliefs for myself at this point in the moment.
Wow, Miguel, that is so powerful. I wish I had been there at the retreat. It sounds amazing.
Oh man, we got to get you out for a different one if we don't partner on one.
Yeah, we should. And that's so beautiful. Like when you kind of decided those old beliefs weren't going to run you, you relaxed. And as you relaxed, you could be authentic. And as you could be authentic, you were powerful.
Absolutely.
And you were benefiting others, and you were happier too.
Absolutely.
Just amazing, amazing. Thank you, Mikkel. So I want to hear more about. I'm going to jump to David now. So David, you've worked in media, and for your career, you're a filmmaker. You're created many years of commercial making, and during the pandemic, you had this sort of revelation. Do you want to share your perspective?
Sure. Well, first, I also want to say I'm really grateful to be here, and Mikkel, I just got super energized hearing your story, and congrats on the talk as well, or the retreat and teaching, and walking in with all that fear and coming out of it with like, wow, those were some awesome conversations. So I definitely want to hear more about that.
Thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, to discuss a little bit about what happened during COVID. So I guess I'll just start with kind of a funny note. I have two fairly young sons, and during COVID, when commercials weren't really filming and my wife and I were at home, we were literally just trying to stay sane. And so for me, my solace and peace started coming at nighttime when everyone else was going to sleep. I was like, I need some kind of space to myself. So I started walking the streets around our neighborhood at night when really there was not even traffic. It was like people weren't even really leaving home at that time. And I started really listening to very old psychology lectures, like psycho-spiritual lectures from like the 60s, 70s, 80s that I was having to find on YouTube and things like that. And I found this super interesting dichotomy as I was walking, listening to this very kind of heady, deep, really intense psychological case material. I was walking by people's homes with these kind of like massive TVs, just blasting these images into their eyeballs and their heads. And I started realizing, one, images and storytelling are just kind of such a vital part of being human, of how we make sense of our lives, of the world around us, and things of that nature. But also, I started noticing that, one, I make commercials for a living, but I can't stand watching them most of the time. And as I was walking by all these homes, just with all these images just blasting in people's eyeballs, I started feeling it as an assault. And as I dug deeper and deeper into that, I realized that if we can't consciously understand that our own imagination, the dreams that we're having at night, are a vital resource of our own nature as human beings, speaking directly to us about our experience. It's kind of a true symbolic representation of our current experience. If we're constantly being flooded by images that are projected at us from the outside that aren't sourced within us, on one hand, it can be incredibly nourishing, such as art, like really good art or a great movie or things like that. But at what point does it just become too much? And does it become very much just like visual junk food that is flooding our system, and therefore we can no longer find ourselves because we don't know the difference between what's trying to emerge out of us and what's being projected at us? And so I've kind of spent the last few years really developing my own ideas and concepts around what it would mean to actually psychologically detox from a culture that's assaulting us day in and day out. And I want to be clear, though, that I still direct commercials, and I still find that, we still need to buy things. There are things that we all enjoy. It's more for me about being conscious as human individuals about how much time and what it is that we're taking in visually. And I feel like that's a really important, way for me to come into this conversation.
I love that, David. He's really talking about our minds are conditioned, not just by, like Michelle was saying, like old programming that we've learned or it's been passed on or whatever, but then also conditioned by what we're taking in. And then the part that really strikes me, and I'd love to hear Michelle's thoughts on this too, is that it's taking all this stuff in that has been created to make us think something or want something is preventing us from listening to our own selves, which is our own spirit, our own creativity. And we know from neuroscience that our greatest ideas come when our brain is not actively focused on something, but when we are in a space, and Michelle's a poet, so he knows, and I'd love to hear your perspective, but like it comes when your brain is in alpha wave mode, which means it's not highly focused and it's not about to pass out. It's that in-between meditative mindset. Like you had that insight as you're walking the streets, relaxing, and you get an insight, right? And so, and Mika, I'd love to hear your thoughts also. I know, I don't know how you come up with your poetry, but I'm sure it's not while you're watching commercials.
Yeah, so many thoughts, and I love so much of what you're both saying. I was over here trying to clap on mute while David was talking just now. And I think he hit the nail on the head that all of these images, these videos that we consume every day, a breaking moment for me was when I realized that these different social media companies, they don't just employ marketers, they employ psychologists. They employ psychologists not for the sake of our well-being, but to figure out the science behind keeping us addicted. And I think of, a junk food diet of content and media as being possibly worse than a junk food diet of bad food, junk food. I think they're neck and neck for the way that they shape us and affect us and impact our health. And to your point, Emma, I think that a flow state is amazing, and I think a flow state is possible when you are also consciously consuming healthy forms of writing, cinema, content, experience in general, right? Like if you're in a flow state and you're exhausted and have a bad diet and do not have a mindfulness practice and have been scrolling, Facebook for hours, as many of us do. I still do it myself, despite knowing how bad it can be. You're in a flow state, but you don't have any fuel to build anything off of that could make you feel creatively fulfilled or feel creatively empowered. And so, Yeah, it's very difficult to survive capitalism as a creative person, and to feel good about just what you experience on a daily basis. It's hard, and I think it's important to be mindful, but as David said, to also give ourselves grace, to know that we are surviving within capitalism. We have to operate within capitalism, and so we can be self-aware, but also kind to ourselves.
I love what you just said, Mikkel. All of it. It's so powerful. And I did want to mention, Mikkel is a successful social media influencer with hundreds of thousands of followers who puts out positive, uplifting, poetic messaging, and of course also has a book, a poetry book, or more. Do you have more than one, actually?
I have two books right now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
two. Okay, we're going to link those below. And you also pointed out to something really interesting, which is when we're tired. When we're tired is when we are not able to necessarily have that mindfulness or that conscious awareness. And that's where we can succumb to the messaging, which can lead to fear, which can lead to, just even these days, like just looking at the news, everything is so heated. And even if I spend 5 minutes on it, I notice how I feel for 6 hours afterward, and it's just so intense. And if you're taking that in, day out, I had a colleague who was like, oh, I can't sleep at night. I'm like, what do you do before you sleep? He's like, I watch 11 p.m. news. I'm like, okay, good luck with sleeping after that, right? But he didn't realize, but so David, so obviously, Mikkel, you have mindfulness practice. I meditate too, like this consciously unplugging every day. It's like that sovereign space of like regaining that mental sovereignty. For me, that's how it is. Like I'm like, okay, like I've cleared the plate. Like I'm in line with myself, with who I am, with my own creativity, with what I can offer. So I can offer to the best of my ability as I go through my day, right? But David, how do you, approach this? How do you approach, consuming media or the way that our world is with the level of awareness you have from being behind a camera and whose job it is to persuade people, right? To do things like, how do you, because one example is, I think I might have shared this example with you, David, for my book Sovereign. I interviewed this lieutenant colonel whose job it was to, was intelligence, and his job was to manipulate the minds of the Taliban, okay, through like local people. And I said, well, how do you consume media and stuff? And he was like, I'm always looking for the writer's motive or the communicator's motive. I see, right, what's their motive? And I was like, how do you communicate with your kids? And he said, well, when we go to the grocery store, if they are, the kids want some like unhealthy cereal, I'll be like, oh yeah, why do you want that cereal? And the kid will be like, oh, because it's like got these little characters on it and they're so cute. And okay, so why do you think they have those characters on it? And their kid's like, because it's so fun and it makes me want to play with the box and like look at the back and eat the cereal. Okay, so why do you think that? He's questioning, like teaching the child sovereignty, really. But anyway, David.
Yeah, it's so funny, like going down that rabbit hole, just thinking about the cereal boxes. So one, I can say it's kind of funny, my Emma's met my wife Rasha as well, who also works in the same industry, and it's funny that we make all of these things for a living, but we don't have a television. And I think for our kids, I also don't want to lie that our kids have their like tablets and they watch things and play games, but it's been interesting, one, as a family, to not have the TV be a central figure in the house, and what that's done, because I was raised where the TV was always on, no matter, it was like by the time someone got home in the afternoon until people went to sleep, that TV is just constantly on, even if no one's actively watching it. But for me, as I've dug deeper and deeper into all of this, one, I've had to get off all social media, and Emma and I have kind of joked about this, but she's like, no, but you need to promote yourself and your work. And for me though, it's been, so as of Well, right now I can say the last social media platform I got off 6 months ago was LinkedIn. I still use LinkedIn for work and networking, but as of now, I've been off all of them for 6 months completely. And it's it's just brought about this kind of more direct experience with what's happening right in front of me, and with the people around me. And one thing I wanted to bring into this, that since we've been discussing it, is, you know, Michelle, you mentioned kind of rewiring or reshaping your own beliefs about yourself. And Emma, you brought in the example of this colonel that you interviewed and his kids and all this messaging. And one thing that I've been sharing with some of my friends in conversation is when, for example, I have a close friend who calls me in a lot, and he keeps saying, I just have this voice in my head that's just this every day, just berating me with negative talk. I'm the worst. I'm awful. And at one point I just stopped him and I said, "How do you know that that's your voice?" And he goes, "Well, what do you mean? It's in my head." And I said, "Yeah, but are you sure that that voice isn't just a conglomerate of the years of a society that's been subtly teaching you to conform, to go against yourself, to distrust yourself, and to trust larger mechanical systems at play?" And I said, "This isn't conspiracy. This is just, look at our public education system. I'm a product of it. It's all about conformity. It's all about the answer only exists on this page. Don't think outside of this box." And so perhaps my friend's voice is not his own, internalized beliefs of just awful parents. Maybe it's a society that since you were a little kid has kind of been like, no, you really don't know anything. You're kind of a blank slate. Don't trust anything that comes from within you. And as soon as we started talking in that regard, his eyes were opening up. There was something else coming in. So, but this is deep material, and it runs. It's so rampant, but it's hard to see. But it's less hard to see when you feel into the subtlety and take a break and distance yourself from all of it. And so, I can keep going, but I'll stop there for now.
David, you're such a wisdom speaker, and that's why I want you on social media, even if someone else handles it for you, because your wisdom, both of you are wise teachers, and your voices need to be heard. There are so many voices out there, spewing all sorts of messages that may or may not be life supportive or helpful for people, and yours really are. To your first point about the TV thing, and then I'd love to hear, Mikhail, what your thoughts are too, but when the TV is going all day, you are programming yourself subliminally. We know this. In psychology, we can, present people with a bunch of images, and then they don't even know they've seen it, but it impacts how their brain has registered it. So first of all, I did so the first time I gave birth without meds, and I was just feeling sorry for myself the whole time and whatever. Second time, I did a hypnosis training. What was the hypnosis training? Listening to tracks once a day in my earphones that were speaking subliminally to my brain and telling me to relax, all as well. Well, guess what? I gave birth. The midwife took a nap because she thought I'm not giving birth till the next day. And I'm like, baby's coming. But I was so relaxed. What happened? How could, through one of the most painful procedures, you be completely relaxed? Like the hypnosis. Okay, so, but my point being, I had simply listened to a track only for 1 hour, 45 minutes, once a day. And it had programmed me for one of the most painful experiences you can have. And what is the TV doing for 5, 6, 8 hours a day, including all those commercials that are telling you you're not in love unless you have this car, you're not in love unless you buy this thing, you got to put the Botox on, you got to do that thing, whatever, right? So I just don't know if people realize that they are conditioning themselves, whether they realize it or not. And then I love what you said about no social media means that you are more present with the here and the now. It was powerful. Didn't you think, Miko?
Yeah, as somebody who works in social media, I
Right?
found it very, very, very powerful. I think about it a lot too, both with TV and social media. I think about the conversations that would be had, the questions that might be asked, the observations that might be made if I didn't spend the time that I do spend on social media and watching TV. And it's tricky again. As somebody who works in the space, I've been thinking a lot about how to dial back on my screen time. And so right now I have this app. It's called Opal. It stops me from logging on at certain parts of the day. If I, before I get out of bed and get my workout in the morning, and after a certain time at night, as well as when I just want to have, like David was referencing, just some good family time. My daughter is 3, and I think the interesting thing about having a kid is that you start thinking about what's good for them, what's healthy for them. Who is their first example? We are. And so you start thinking about what's healthy for you with a bit more urgency. And so that is some of what I've been sitting with. My daughter is 3, and I've been sitting with things like this and thoughts like this for the past few years. What does it look like for me to be the example of being more present, of being more patient, being more imaginative, all the different outcomes that are presumably possible because of a willingness to take more space from media, from social media, and from TV. And so I love hearing that you've been fully off for 6 months now, David. And I guess I'm curious about if anything surprised you after you really got off of social media.
It's a great question. I would say, okay, what I realized is that when we're active on social media, we are truly managing an entirely separate identity. So even if you're just on one platform, let's say you're on 4 or 5. So on top of just trying to manage your day-to-day business and the material reality, you're now curating and managing totally separate selves. It's almost like someone with multiple personality disorder. And you are having to try to manage being multiple split selves, and then trying to achieve some form of success as these separate selves, and comparing yourself to the separate selves of others. It's literally existing on another plane. And so when I got off, I realized that while there is an importance to being on social media, I don't want to discount that. I think it's unbelievably important in so many ways, and I think I kick myself sometimes because I realize the importance of it. However, this next thing I'm going to say kind of is going to loop into what we've already been talking about, which is if you're constantly on these things, even as a consumer, and if you have television on in the background, and Emma was talking about kind of this subliminal messaging that's kind of permeating your being, even if it's on in the background. It wasn't until the radio that for the first time, something else could really manipulate your instincts that wasn't present in your material reality. So think about it. In a little over 100 years, we've gone from like the radio to the television to the internet to smartphones to virtual reality. And it just seems like more and more they're trying to control like the periphery of what even is reality. And the most important thing I wanted to say in all of this is that if your instincts are being manipulated by something out of your physical environment, that's how you know you're being tricked in some way. If you're in your house and it's a beautiful sunny day and there's no actual threat to you or your loved ones in any kind, whether it's a wild animal, an intruder of some kind or whatever, if you're watching something and it's triggering your fear instinct, that does not exist in your material environment. And we need to make that differentiation to stay sane. Because if you have the TV on and you're watching images of war, and then you're scrolling social media and there's some other natural disaster going on, but meanwhile your family's totally safe, sitting calm in the living room, what's really happening to you? Your instincts are being manipulated to feel fearful, and therefore go seeking some authority to assuage your fear. And that's dangerous. That's a dangerous state to constantly be in. So getting off of social media for me has allowed me to differentiate what I'm feeling based on something internal or something from my sensory environment, or is it coming from another source altogether? Where is it coming from? And constantly questioning, where is this whatever feeling? What's the source of it, and how can I have a relationship to it and understand that source better?
Wow, that is so insightful. It's like, is it coming from inside? Is it coming from my immediate environment? Or is it coming from another dimension, like a virtual experience?
Yeah.
I mean, that level of awareness, I'm just really grateful to get that from you as someone whose job it is to condition people to think certain things, right? In commercial. I mean, it's just so insightful. Yeah. Michell, did you want to respond? You were nodding your head.
I'm just agreeing aggressively right now. Part of what I spoke about at the retreat was there's this concept that it's not you, it's the systems. It is the systems that allow us to operate as humans that are in conflict with systems of society, right? So a lot of what David was alluding to pertains to our stress response system. We are not that much different biologically from our ancestors who were literally hunting and gathering. There were no consistent requirements to respond to email after 8 p.m. There was no worry about how others would perceive you on social media, which is 24/7. And so all of these elements of uncertainty, this questioning, this stress, this need to be on in a certain way, we are not meant to manage for that. We are not meant to manage for the world that we are being forced to live in. And so I'm just aggressively head nodding and agreeing and just taking notes.
No, absolutely. How do you both feel about the news? What do you say, Michell?
Oh man, specify the question, please. The stories themselves, or the news in general as an entity.
Just your relationship, I guess, to it.
Oh man.
You know, piggybacking off of what David said of just there's an external,
Yeah, I'll speak to what I try to do with the news and am somewhat successful at doing. I try to be aware enough of what is happening in global, national, and local news to protect myself and my family.
Yeah.
I try to avoid being in the know on every single story, every single possibility, especially in instances where I am acutely aware that news outlets are owned by, I forget the number, but it's less than 12 people. 5 people total.
5 or 6 companies.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there any that are not billionaires, Emma?
Huh?
Are there any of those 5 or 6 that are not billionaires?
Yeah, they're companies that own them. So you've got to wonder,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that, David's talked a lot about awareness, being aware of the goal of these companies and publications and people who profit from the news, that it's to keep us in this constant loop of having to see what is next, wondering what is next. And, without worry, without making everything feel necessary, they don't bring us back into that loop as frequently. And so I have to prioritize my needs to not always be aggressively in the know, to not be terrified of what will happen on the next news cycle, but know enough to protect my family. And that is a balance that I am nowhere near close to mastering. So, David, if you have any tips, any insights, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
No, I think, Michell, what you were saying is I feel very similar to you in that I try to, roughly stay in the know. But one thing I absolutely try to avoid is watching live news on the television. I read, there are a lot of companies now that send you the kind of quick bites of kind of what's going on in the world that I can scan in, 90 seconds. So I think the news to me is one of the most toxic dumping grounds for triggering instincts and as Michell, you were saying, stress responses. Nothing like the news will put you into fight or flight mode. Mm-hmm. One story I found really interesting as I've been, Emma, I think I was joking with you that I've, gone down the rabbit hole back and forth way too many times. But because I work in advertising, over the last few years, I've been doing a lot of research, and, my wife's like, you got to stop buying books. Like, where are we going to put all these things? But one thing I find super interesting, and this should really connect the dots, is, so there was this guy who's considered one of the kind of godfathers of public relations in the modern Western world, and his name was Edward Bernays. And funnily enough, Edward Bernays happens to be the nephew of Sigmund Freud.
All right.
And so isn't it interesting that the person, one of the few individuals who is considered to be a godfather of public relations and subsequently advertising in the United States, had a very, very keen and intimate understanding of the human psyche based on his relationship with his uncle, and brought all of those things not only into Europe, but also to the United States to decipher how can we mass broadcast messages out to the public and sway public opinion on any myriad of issues. So I just find that little connection to be super interesting, because once you know that that's an entry point into all of this, there's no way to separate what public relations has become now that we're talking about the news and the brilliant psychology of probably who's considered the most famous psychiatrist ever in Sigmund Freud. So kind of leave that one to just like sit in the ether.
Yeah.
It's
fascinating to me. And I have a friend who's an award-winning writer, and he's a current events journalist for major publications. And he will routinely go on retreat for a couple months. And he says, I come back, and he's like, nothing's really happened. He's like, it's not that big a deal. But he said, our job as journalists is to get you into fight or flight so that you will click and read, and then you will click on the advertisement. And I use this quote in my book because I was quoting a major television executive who said, our job is to deliver the consumer to the advertisers, which is wild when you think about it. But the point is, okay, so the journalists are looking to activate our fight or flight. Why? Because it gets our attention, because our brain is going to focus. And then when our brain is on there, then it's going to focus on whatever it is that is being delivered. And so I think, like you're both saying, just having awareness of that and having really good boundaries around it is key. And I just want to, mention one thing, as we're talking about this, that, for every horrible thing that gets reported, there are millions of people helping their neighbors, loving on their families, doing random acts of kindness because they're just see that other people are in need around them. And all of those stories do not get reported, but they are what humans are truly about. Like, most people are good people trying to live good lives, being kind to others. And we know that from research. Compassion is actually innate. And whenever you read all this bad news, it's like my son's like, there's no news, Mom. It's just bad news. The bad news you just feel like, oh my gosh, the world's going to hell and everybody's a bad person. No, most people are good people. And, if there's this one message I want to get out there is that, to realize that, like, you are good and the people around you are also good. Like, there's not, the news is not the reality. It's actually the exception, I think.
That's really beautiful. And it's like making me emotional just hearing that, because I really do believe that, and I spend a lot of time, at least traveling in the US on a lot of the commercial projects I'm working on. And I'm always amazed everywhere I go when I, go out to a dinner like near the hotel or something, or I'm even, going into a local coffee shop. This country has a lot of beautiful, amazing people in it. And almost everywhere I go, what I see the most are people collaborating, people helping each other. As you said, neighbors who are like watching each other's kids because some parent, their spouse is in the hospital and they're taking on another job. Like, people are doing the best they can. And when people get so down on our this country and like where it's going, I'm like, but if you just turn it off, that's the other thing I wanted to mention. We're talking about sovereignty. We have the power because we can turn it off. Mm-hmm. No one forces us to watch these things. No one forces us to read them. We can literally just click off. And when we do that, we can be present in our community, for our family. We can see all these amazing things that are happening around us all the time. The most beautiful, simple little things, these little gestures. And that is so vital, it seems, to being sovereign, is you have the power to just shut it off. Yes. And no one can take that away from you.
No one.
And that's an amazing feeling.
Yes. Yes, we have the power. That is sovereignty. Sovereignty is moving through life with awareness and alignment with yourself so you can show up as your greatest potential, as the person you want to be, and be in touch with yourself, not conditioned. Yes. Yeah. I love that. Michell, do you have any parting words for us on that note?
Oh, man. I'm about to take what David just said and add it to some of my core beliefs that I'm going to write through this week.
Yes.
That we always have the power to turn it off. I think in a lot of ways I've been working towards a similar understanding out of necessity. Everything from the snooze button that I kept wanting to hit this morning when I wanted to sleep in, I needed to work out. The background is that I have deterioration in my spine and a herniated disc and all these things that make me getting out of bed painful any day. But when you have a toddler who's up until 11 o'clock at night, getting out of bed is painful for different reasons. But again, that sovereignty and that awareness of sovereignty feels really relevant, from, being able to get up in the morning and know this will make me feel better. Right. I think a lot of it comes back to the willingness to delay gratification, to delay, the rush and the distraction of watching some more TV, watching some more of the news, scrolling more, in the interest of maintaining personal sovereignty, in doing what is better for us, doing what will actually make us happier in the long run too. I think about a lot of the social media that I consume and the junk TV. I have my shows that I am choosing to watch, and then I have my shows that, like, a friend is like, watch this thing, and it's fast paced, and I just find myself watching it because I started it, but it makes me feel more nervous. It makes me feel more frustrated. It makes me more closed off. Remembering that I can always disconnect and separate myself from all of these different things that are flashing in front of my eyes feels like a really important grounding belief, and a way to kind of take back control of the time that I do have.
That is so beautiful, Michell. Yeah, David, do you want to just launch with about the being alone with yourself thing?
Yeah, so I'm just always curious about asking people, like I asked you both, if you, what it's like to just be totally alone with yourselves, without any distraction. And I was mentioning, my own dad, who he just loves me. I mean, he's the biggest cinephile of anyone I know. My dad knows a lot about movie history and things like this. But when I asked him, do you ever just stop and even look out the window? And he was like, no. There's no moment of total silence, in the middle of a day where it's just you with the birds chirping outside. And if there's not, it's just, I felt that as a pain when he told me that. It kind of hurt. And to just constantly be existing in an unnatural environment. Because as Michell said earlier, humans evolve very slowly. As a species, we've been evolving for a very long time. We are very, very similar to our hunter-gatherer ancestors. Mm-hmm. And yet, in the course of 100 years, the light speed advancements of technology are just very quickly taking us out of we are nature. Humans are nature itself. We're not separate from it. So to exist in these very unnatural environments creates a lot of strange symptoms in us that we still can't comprehend. Mm-hmm. And isn't it interesting when you read about people who are suffering from addictions or behavioral disorders or obsessive compulsive, they go to these nature centers and they spend a week mm-hmm. with this group in the woods, and all of a sudden their symptoms are gone. Mm-hmm. What is that telling you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And there's actually 2 studies, like that one study, where people prefer to give themselves electric shocks rather than being alone, which is insane, but that's one thing. But the other thing is that when you bring people outside into nature for 3 days, unplugged, they come back with 50% more creativity. 50% more creativity. Like, what does everyone want? Everyone wants to be innovative. Every company wants people to be innovative. And why? Because when you're, like you said, unplugging from everything, you're plugging back into you. You go into nature, you're plugging back into who you are. You're realigning with yourself. You're becoming sovereignly aligned with who you are. And you get in touch with your natural innovative potential, which is everyone's birthright. And every child is so creative. But then they become adults, and there's like this massive creativity crisis going. As people go along in school, as kids go along in school, their creativity plummets. And you put them on a screen 24/7. They're not able to be in that place where they're super creative. But all of us have the potential to be extremely creative and help, improve this planet. And it's just so fascinating to me because that comes when we're alone. It comes when we're aligned. Yeah, Michelle, you were going to say something too.
I really agree with what you're saying too, Emma. I forget what I was going to say exactly, but I think another piece of this conversation too is that we're meant to have alone time and we're meant to have time in community with other people in real life, like not just on Zoom calls, not just on phone calls or through email threads, but in real life. And sometimes I wonder if humans are fortunate enough to look back on this era and, describe us as living in ancient America, like how there are ancient Egyptians who were also studying ancient Egypt because the timeline went on that long. I wonder what they will say about this era. If you zoom out enough, we just branched away from so many of the things that make that ground us as humans, right? Like when you look back at communal society, it wasn't meant to be this mega conglomeration. It was meant to be a structure that honored the needs of its people, which has oftentimes been better when it's been again, smaller in scope and able to better respond to people's needs. Like so many societies, so many early societies are communal based. They are not productivity centered. They are not revenue centered. They are based on community. Half the day is not centered around work, so folks can have siesta or other different things that allow individual people to connect with each other and to rest. And that has been what humans know is best for humans for thousands of years.
Yes.
And again, just the past couple hundred years, we have deviated away from that very aggressively, and we have built propaganda and PR, as David referenced before, to affirm that we're supposed to always be moving and in motion and innovating when we're not creating the conditions for that.
This is so
It's
amazing. I was
brilliant.
just
Yeah.
reading an anthropologist's book the other day, and he was saying how in traditional tribes, like in South America and some of the tribes that are still living according to sort of ancient ways, stress isn't part of the day, but rest is. Like we're supposed to be in, like from a scientific perspective, we're supposed to be in parasympathetic activation, not sympathetic, because that's where we rest, we rejuvenate, we repair, we restore, and we gather our forces for those more exceptional moments when things are hard.
Yeah.
Sorry, my door's open. Did you guys hear some noise in the background or not?
A little bit, but it's all
Just
good.
just a
Not
tiny
much.
tiny
Okay.
sound.
Yeah, did you guys
Yeah.
want to add anything? Or we can also wrap up. I mean, it's up to you.
I just want to say what you were both saying is, yeah, it's absolutely brilliant, and I totally agree that we are, we are living in a very kind of inhumane. We've created a very inhumane, anti-nature mode of living, and then we wonder why we're sick, we're depressed, we're anxious. We're so many things, and I guess the last thing that I wanted to say, and I had this thought yesterday, is once we find out how we have value, how we bring value, I should say, to our actual human community, that's when we feel, I think, most sovereign
Yeah.
and most connected, is that my presence, my value, who I came in, as I study a lot of Native American cultures as well. And they would say, when you find out what your medicine is that you came in carrying, then that medicine belongs to the tribe, to the group. That's when you feel most connected and most alive, because you're directly an influence in a positive way to your community. And how so many of us don't feel that. We don't know how we're of value, and we try to fit every single human being is absolutely insanely amazing. If we actually tapped into our full capacity as a human, we have no idea how amazing we are, and how we're each these little frequencies that belong to the group. And if we could just find out what that frequency is, and then let it be known and have others feel it, it's like a cup that never empties. But we don't live in a place that really nurtures that well or helps people find it. So I don't know.
It's beautiful.
These are like my random.
It's beautiful. And it's backed by research, actually. I mean, research shows that, I could summarize 20 years of studying the science of happiness in one sentence, which is the people who live the happiest lives, well, not just happy, I would say fulfilled, because happiness can just come and go, are those who live lives characterized by compassion for others. And like you said, in whatever way your medicine is expressed, right? Whether it's you're a filmmaker or you're a poet or you're whatever it is that you do, right? We all have our own medicine, whether you're helping 2 people or you're helping 2,000, it's the same, right? So compassion for others balanced with self-compassion. And as we've been talking, like our modern lifestyles sometimes tries to stand directly in the way, either through programming or through lifestyle, that self-compassion. But that combination and that awareness of the sovereign awareness, all of those together aligns with you being in touch with your medicine and expressing it and healing the planet. My kids, even last night, my little guy couldn't go to sleep because, Mom, why are people polluting the ocean? I don't want the turtles to die. He's very upset. And I'm like, I know. When the kids are asking questions, you're like, yeah, I don't know why people are polluting. I don't know why, and it's just, we have the power, and that comes back to what we were talking about earlier too, that we all have the power to be in touch with that medicine and to express it. And that is how we heal the world. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know how the last thing I'll say, because this is like one thing I definitely wanted to say today is, I know I mentioned earlier the power to turn it off.
Yeah.
The other thing that we have is we have the possibility to be completely self-cohesive and not hate ourselves. And if we realize that we can actually not hate ourselves, that we can enjoy ourselves and really feel into the power that we do have, the strength, the beauty that we actually have, then we're way more powerful than people can even believe. And so it's almost like that's our weapon to fight is I'm actually not going to be divided inside.
Yeah.
I'm going to work on healing that division.
Yes.
And I can turn off whatever you're projecting at me. Now I'm kind of really unstoppable.
That's right.
So I definitely wanted to say that.
Yes. And Audre Lorde, who self-described as a gay black woman in a straight white man's world, she has this beautiful quote, and she's a poet, activist, like playwright. Self-care is not self-indulgence. It's an act of political warfare. I just love that quote so much because
There you go.
right? If they say, oh, self-love is self-indulgence, no, I don't think so. And like when I teach these groups of executives that come in and ask how many of you are self-critical, most of them raise their hand, like 95, sometimes 100%. But every now and then there's one or two people who don't, which by the way are often black women, because I feel like they have gone through so much on so many levels. And then if they've come to that full circle of like, no, loving themselves, inevitably it's those who say they're not self-critical that are so powerful. They're the leaders in the room. Like they just shine. Like they're like, whoa, it's amazing.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, it puts you in touch with your fullest potential. You're not manipulatable anymore. No one can, because if you don't hate yourself, you're not walking around with big Achilles tendon all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Any last words, Michelle?
Again, I'm just nodding my head in agreement. I think I'll just end by saying I'm just really thankful for and appreciative of both of your perspectives. I think a lasting thought that I'm kind of sitting with right now is that, again, going back to these concepts of self-care and self-love, as the means to ground yourself and to find your medicine, right? To share whatever your medicine may be with your people. It's all interconnected. And when you make space for the silence, you make space for self-exploration, for self-discovery. That's how you find out who you're meant to be in the first place. What part of your community, your village, whatever your word might be, that you're meant to be.
I love that, Michelle. And both of you have so much medicine that you are sharing with Michelle, with your words, with your poetry, and David too, with your both of your perspectives. And this podcast episode was medicine. It was beautiful. So thank you both so much for being on it.
Thank you all both.
Thank you.